Hello everybody, my name is Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist and welcome to my channel. Those of you who are brand new, welcome. Those of you who are returning, welcome back. Always good to see you again. For those who are new, my name is Kat Bowser. I am a licensed therapist, but I'm also a writer working on my first novel. And on my channel, I like to talk about what I consider to be the heart of writing, which are the characters, and the heart of the characters is in their psychology. So on my channel, that's what we focus on, the psychology behind world building, characters, plot, and everything that falls in between. So today, I'm actually doing a different kind of video. I will link the original author, the adorable author, below. She did about 2 weeks ago, she did a video on the top 5 books that changed your life. And I really wanted to respond to her, but I had so much to say that I didn't think it would all fit in a comment. So I reached out to her and told her I would be interested in doing a video following up. And she gave her blessing and said, please let me know when you post it. So here we go. So that being said, I think I will start chronological order because I think that's the easiest way to do this. So the first book that I can think of that changed my life is this one. And this is, it has no cover anymore, if that's any indication. This is Walt Disney's Treasury of Disney Classics. I received this book when I think I was a toddler. I think it was like three or four. And it has been through a lot. My father actually repaired it for me several times. I think the last time he repaired it was in 1999, I think. So basically what this book is, this is essentially novelizations of Disney's popular movies. So there was like the Aristocats, there was 101 Dalmatians, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, all those kind of popular stories, and they put them in novelization form with some artwork. And the reason I list that as number one is that is the book I remember the most being read to as a child. I grew up on Disney, like Disney movies, Disney books, the whole gambit. So this is one that my parents read to me all the time. I still remember, I think my favorite story was Sleeping Beauty, which is still my favorite Disney movie, by the way. And I just remember sitting with my parents and we would read through it together. When I learned how to read, I would start reading it with them. They would read one paragraph, I would read one paragraph, so on and so forth. And I think for me, one, it created a love of reading in me. I really became interested in the visions that just the words would paint. Even though this has pictures in it, it doesn't have a lot of pictures in it. It has like maybe one every other page, something along those lines. So the words were really the ones painting the picture. And it really kind of ingrained in me how you can show someone anything you want to show them with just words. And that's something I still try to do when I write. And I really think this book was my first introduction to how you can do that. And honestly, I still love reading this book. It's obviously meant for younger kids, but I still get a nostalgia out of reading it. And honestly, I still enjoy the way that they added some detail to the stories. They obviously don't cover every aspect of the movies because I think these stories are like 10 to 15 pages each, and most of these movies are about an hour and a half. But I do like how they phrase things, how they added a little detail here and there on this character or that character that isn't in the movie. And so those are always fun. But I would say overall, this was the book that really made me love reading, and loving reading in turn made me love writing. So the next book that I think had the most influence on me as a child was actually a twofer. So this one I'm counting as one because everybody's saying the author. Where the Sidewalk Ends and A Light in the Attic by Shel Silverstein. This one, Where the Sidewalk Ends, we've had the longest, as you can probably tell by how beat up it is. If this book is falling apart, I don't know why it still hasn't completely fallen apart, but I'm very glad it hasn't. after the Disney books, those were the ones I picked up the most. And those were the ones that I read on my own the most because they're very short poems. There isn't a lot of difficult language. So these are things I was reading when I first learned how to read. Um, and it actually got me to try poetry for the first time, specifically rhyming poetry. And I am glad to admit I do not have any of those poems still because they did not turn out that well. But aside from that, I really like that these poems are a mix. There are definitely, most of them are just these silly, funny imagery. I mean, there's one in there about a girl who eats a whale. There's one in there about a king who gets his jaws shut with a peanut butter sandwich. Silly things like that. But then you get things like this. Listen to the mustn'ts, child. Listen to the don'ts. Listens to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. Listen to the never haves, then listen close to me. Anything can happen, child. Anything can be. That's pretty deep for a kid's book. I mean, I might be jumping the gun here, but I like that there's little poems in there scattered through all these silly things that are encouraging, that are really provoking a sense of creativity. Right, the third book that made an impact on me, this is actually a new version, but same thing. The original Grimm's Fairy Tales. This book's big. This is the complete collection. I had no idea there were these many fairy tales. My love of fairy tales started after my love of Disney movies. Disney caught my attention, but then when I found out they were based on stories, I wanted to go and read the original stories. And so I did. I sought them out. I sought out the original Snow White, the original Cinderella, the original Sleeping Beauty. And the original Sleeping Beauty is still my favorite fairy tale. But the thing with the Grimm fairy tales that I think everybody's aware of is they are very dark. They were originally created, most of them, as warnings, ways to teach children what to avoid, things that they should do or shouldn't do. And like I said, this collection is big. I mean, God, how many pages is this book? This book's almost 700 pages of just fairy tales. And there's probably about half of them that I'm reading for the first time, going through this complete collection. And I'm loving every single one of them. I love fairy tales, and I still love retellings of fairy tales and retellings of stories, because I think it really teaches that it's the overall theme that's important, but you can manipulate that and change the characters, change the setting, and still tell the same message. And that's a really creative method, and one that I personally love to do. I love referencing fairy tales, rewriting myths, things like that, and I love putting them in my books. So for me, that's, I think, why the Grimm fairy tales have such an impact on me, because they fed my love of fantasy, but they also introduced me that you don't have to stick by, because it was told this way, you have to stay with it being told that way. No, you don't. In fact, most of the time, the more popular versions of them are retellings. These started as oral traditions. They started as things that you would tell around a fire to your kids. And eventually someone decided to write them down, and they got changed and altered as that happened over and over again. So, I mean, the version we have now may be very different from the original version we had. And just like the Disney version is different than the original story. So, yeah, Grimm's Fairy Tales. If you haven't read the complete collection, go pick it up. It's pretty cheap. I got this at Barnes & Noble for about $8. So if you don't have the whole collection, go pick it up. Book number 4 that had a huge impact on my life. Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beale. This is still one of my favorite fantasy stories. And it was what I would consider my first adult fantasy story. I believe it's officially listed as YA now. I read it for the first time when I was like, I think in 5th or 6th grade, and I believe they list it as adult at that time. So I don't know if it's been recategorized or if I'm just not remembering properly. But in any event, I was so proud the first time I read it because I had read a book that was over 200 pages long. And for me, that was a big deal because I was reading longer books, but this book was long and it had more complicated language than I was used to. It had poems and songs in it, which are reminiscent of an older type of writing style, and it's one I still love. I don't see it enough. I know some people don't like it. I love seeing songs and stories and poems in books because those are ways that people talk about their lives. They're ways we find out about culture, about beliefs, and so I love seeing it. But the main thing this book did, it made me think. Um, I mean, before you have stories that they they have a theme, they have a message, and they definitely hit home, and they kind of make you stop and say, okay, well that makes sense, or I can see it through this character, this or that. This one legitimately made me think and ponder for a long time. Um, I don't want to give away anything for anyone that hasn't read it, even though I don't know when it was published. It was published a while ago. Um, but anyway, somebody probably still hasn't read it, so I'm not going to spoil it for them. But there's themes about immortality, mortality, death, life, what makes living. And in fact, after I read this book, I did a book report on it. And one of the things I brought up in the book report was, what is it that makes living living? What is it that makes a life worthwhile? And my teacher called me out and she said, that is some very deep thinking. I said, it's brought up in this book. I said, this book made me think about that. And those kind of deep messages are still messages I love to put in writing. They're messages that I think are very important to put in writing because they're not messages that have an easy answer. There really isn't an answer because everybody's going to have a different opinion on it. What makes a life? What makes a life worthwhile? What makes a life worth living? And, I'm going to have a different answer than you are. And books that make you think about that kind of stuff is important. Like, even now to this day, I remember a quote from here, and I'm going to use it because I don't think it's a spoiler. It's a conversation between the unicorn and her companion, Smindrick, the magician. And Smindrick mentions to her, you have no regrets as I do. And she says, I can never regret. I can feel sorrow, but it's not the same thing. For me as a kid in elementary school, that really hit me because to me, it was like, okay, well, when you feel sorry for something, you feel sad. So the concept that you could regret something and not necessarily feel sad about it, or vice versa, my mind kind of went, what? But again, it made me think. It made me process these ideas, these philosophical ideas, and I still think that's something that should be encouraged, and we don't do it enough, in my opinion. So if you haven't read this, definitely read it. There is a movie, an animated movie on it, and it's probably one of the best adaptations of a book I've ever seen. The author of the book actually worked on the screenplay, so maybe that's why. But I recommend both to you. Last book that had a huge impact on my life. Return of the King, Two Towers, Fellowship of the Ring, and The Hobbit. Honestly, anything by Tolkien, but I'm going to count these four together because even though this one was written before these and it was originally written just as a children's story, they still link together, so I'm going to count them together. Tolkien remains one of my strongest inspirations, in case you could not tell by my backdrop. And not only because of the stories that he tells and the characterizations, but because his style of world building and character development and all those things made me feel not alone. When I was writing stories, when I first started writing stories and coming up with ideas, I was going in depth with world building. I was creating religions, I was creating languages, I was creating myths. And I got told a lot, that's a bit extreme, isn't it? I don't think you need to go that in depth. And for me, I liked to do it because it made it easier for me to write the characters and write their interactions with the world. But I still felt kind of out of place. And then when I was in school, one of my teachers told me, if that's the kind of thing you like, you need to read Tolkien. So after much struggle with his writing style, I'm not going to lie, his writing style is not the easiest to get through. And as much as I love it, it is still sometimes a struggle for me. But I pushed through it because of the world you enter through it. So I picked up Tolkien, and after struggling through it for a bit, I was like, oh my God, not only is what I'm doing not unusual, but the godfather of fantasy did it. That made me feel so validated. Like, the amount of heart and passion I'm putting into this writing is fine. It's not only is it fine, but look what Tolkien did with it. Now, am I comparing myself to Tolkien? No, I don't. I mean, I don't think any writer really should, because you're your own writer. You have your own voice. But it made me feel just not so, I guess, unusual. It made me feel like what I wanted to do could be done and has been done. So for me, these books really changed me in the sense that it made me think about, okay, what can I really do with my writing? What do I want to do with my writing? And that is make my own world, make my own Middle Earth, I guess, so to speak, my own planets, my own characters, my own creatures. And it's still things that I'm working on. Even to this day, I love doing it. I can't wait to share it with you guys when it's done. But just overall, Tolkien's world, it's a hopeful world. Okay, guys, so those are the 5 books that most dramatically changed and impacted my life. Again, thanks to the adorable author for this idea. I really had fun with it. Those of you, I encourage you to think about this yourself, even if you don't do your own video. Please leave your comments below. I'd love to read them because I'm always looking for books that have a strong impact on people. So please leave your comments or suggestions below. I will get to them as soon as I can. If you guys enjoy this content, make sure to subscribe so you know whenever I upload new videos. And as always, I hope you guys have a good one until we meet again.